Welcome to Glass in Session. I'm your host, Val. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the last episode on Romanian wine with special guest Dracula. This week, we're heading to Romania's neighbor to the south, to Bulgaria, to see what there is to drink there, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to be blood. First, let's get into the place. Like I said, Bulgaria is Romania's neighbor to the south in southeast Europe, bordering the Black Sea on the eastern section of what is known as the Balkan Peninsula. If we were to go clockwise from the northerly neighbor of Romania, we would find, like I said, the eastern border being the Black Sea, the southeastern border being Turkey, the southwestern border is Greece, and then we turn the corner to climb Bulgaria's western border to cross through Macedonia and then hit Serbia on the northern half of that western border. As always, I do put in the show notes resources with wine maps if you're a visual person and you just gotta see you some maps, and I get it. I am a visual learner. I like to see the maps. Now let's look at the wine history because it dates back to at least 4000 BC, according to archaeological evidence, although grape history dates back further. Again, archaeological evidence, pips. This wasn't necessarily linked to winemaking, but that said, we find us the Thracians again, who were the original winemaking inhabitants so well known for their bangin' juice that they earned a shout-out in Homer's Iliad. In fact, Thracian wine was the very hooch that was fed to Cyclops to knock him out so Odysseus could impale him some Polyphemus with a spear, right? Nice! So yes, the first vines in Bulgaria used for the purposes of winemaking are believed to have been planted by these very wine god-worshipping Thracians. And these very Thracians who were most likely the ones who made the first wine here. But let's see. Throughout history, there was a quick interlude of Celtic tribal existence, as evidenced by the Bulgarian capital's name, Sofia from Serdica, named for the Celtic Serdi tribe. So there's that. The Romans showed up in the 1st century, and of course, they worked to further develop the winemaking processes as they did all over Europe. And they are even believed to have issued the first wine law here in Bulgaria. It would be Emperor Antonius Pius in the 2nd century. Of course, after Rome fell, the winemaking traditions pretty much continued, not to mention accompanying ritual practice and cults associated with wine. Where can I join one of those? Sign me up. I think I'm actually already in one called Wine Podcasters. But if you're going to belong to a cult, I mean, hey. Bulgaria was then Christianized in the 9th century, and by the Middle Ages, as in many wine regions, it would be the monasteries and churches further developing the wine production techniques in the area. In fact, the cellars of many abbeys one could often find were the ideal place to store wine. It makes sense after everything we've learned about wine caves and tunnels and all those things throughout the years that I've been doing this. Also, during the Middle Ages, Bulgaria was known for having different quality levels of wine to the point where there is an ancient legend that one town, as Zenovgrad, was actually saved from destruction in 1205 during the Fourth Crusade because of the wine being so damn good. I can almost imagine the conversation now. Marauder, woohoo, let's burn a Zenovgrad down because that's what we do. Other marauder, no brah, the wine here is dope. You get my point. Then along came the Ottomans in the 1300s. As with other wine regions in this area, wine production was officially nixed. And because of the Ottomans, again, this is why we can't have nice things, except for coffee. Yet also, like many other countries conquered by the Ottomans, this did not stop the Bulgarians from altogether making wine around the country. And the Bulgarians were trying to get their arms around their wine culture again. And in the 19th century, books on winemaking and distilling, as well as the first cookbook, were being published. They were really trying to establish this industry. When the Ottomans were finally booted out, again in 1878, the peasants reclaimed their land with over 50,000 hectares of this being vineyard. No sooner did the freshly independent kingdom of Bulgaria publish wine legislation. They hadn't even gotten to the constitution yet because, again, wine. All of this just in time for phylloxera to wreak havoc on the vineyards, just as it did all over Europe in the early 1800s. By the 20th century, we would start finding the first wine cooperatives being creative thanks to the influx of French resources, people, and know-how. Then by 1944, Bulgaria boasted over 143,000 hectares of vines, after which government collectives would be taking over the winemaking and scale it up, as well as established institutes for the study of vine and winemaking, specialty journals, and then by 1959, the first demarcated actual wine regions. This was a time of planning international varieties like Cabernet and Chardonnay, which used to be common, quaffable finds during the Cold War. And back then, the top export, you guessed it, Russia, because of course it was. By the mid-1950s, we're talking more than 25 million liters of wine from Bulgaria a year. Investments in equipment and technology did boost not only Bulgaria's production growth, but it also boosted their wine imports. And believe it or not, this is one of the reasons Bulgaria found themselves at the top of the wine exporter list in the world by the end of the 1960s. And then, of course, in the 1960s, we also saw the actual establishment of those 5 major wine regions defined not just by geography, but also by grape varieties, soil types, etc. Now, the state-run monopoly would continue capitalizing on wine exports through the 1970s when it was actually a top exporter, like I said, among winemaking countries around the world. However, we've mentioned USSR President Gorbachev's whole anti-alcohol jag before, and yes, it took its toll on Bulgaria just as it did in other commie countries. Yet, wine was still being exported to countries around Europe, and the UK was a big part of that market, particularly after the wall came down and the USSR pretty much imploded on itself, and even into the early mid-1990s. This was also about the time that larger estates were being established, some of them being landmark producers to this day, and the EU was investing in planting of the vineyards and winery construction. In the late aughts of the new millennium, Bulgaria became part of the EU and thus bestowed upon Bulgaria 2 PGIs, or Protected Geographical Indication regions. While 20 years later, the Bulgarian wine industry is still in flux, they can now claim to have over 400 wineries on the books as of 2024, with growth for the foreseeable future. So what about these regions? Well, those wine regions that were established in the 1960s are still a topic of discussion to this day. Bulgarian wine producers, wine professionals, wine writers, and other industry professionals often highlight these areas, so we're going to hit them up here. I found them most easily explained on the Bulgarian Wine Company's website, so I'm going to hit them up really quick. We've got northern Bulgaria's Danube Plain. It has 49 what they call I think they call them micro-regions. I just call them sub-regions, but they're micro-regions along the south bank of and there it is again, Danube River. White and sparkling wines are produced here, along with fresh and fruit-forward reds. Eastern Bulgaria's Black Sea region, with 32 subregions, is where we find almost a third of the country's vines. Now, we've got the moderating influences from the sea to help temper the climate extremes. So beyond the cold winters and hot summers, we've got a little moderation from the water, which helps because here we can find not only 53% of the white grapes grown in the country, but lovely white wines, international and local varieties being used, and they're also making some off-dry white wines here as well. 2 river valleys make up this next region, which is the Sub-Balkan Rose Valley, or some call it Valley of the Rose. It has 13 subregions and is known for high-quality wines with international and local varieties, mostly white, dry, and off-dry styles. Southern Bulgaria's Thracian lowlands has 39 subregions, and Zenovgrad, that city that was almost burned down during the Crusades but was spared because of its banging juice, this is where we find it. And this is where we find most of the red varieties planted, making some kicking local and international single varietal styles as well as blends. Finally, see, I told you we're going to go through this quick. Southwestern Bulgaria's Struma River Valley. It's small with 10 subregions. Actually, like I said, they're all called micro-regions on the websites. But this tells me that the terroir is important here too. EU PGIs be damned. This warmer region with a strong Mediterranean influence gives us some really nice red wines from international and indigenous varieties, many of which can age quite well. And let me just say this about that. There are those 2 PGIs I mentioned slapped on the country by the EU in 2007. The Danube Plain in the north of the Balkan Mountains is where we're going to find about 25% of the vineyards. Then there's the PGI Thracian lowlands with the majority of the vines in the southern area. Now, from what I understand, this was a natural border that was drawn. It was used to divide the regions without any regard to the original wine regions that were geography, soil, grape types, climate, all those things we used to define terroir, including the traditions and man-made influences. Something around 40% of the wines or more produced in Bulgaria are PGI wines. I'm skipping over the 52 or so PDOs because they aren't used on a grand scale, maybe about 1% of production according to the later resources I found. But if you are interested in these 52 PDOs and some of the ones that are used more often than not, they are all listed in Master of Wine Caroline Gilby's excellent book on the wine of Romania, Bulgaria, and Moldova. She has spent decades, even behind the Iron Curtain, working with these countries and wines and producers, and has quite the depth of knowledge on the subject, speaking from firsthand experience in many cases. This brings me to the grapes, of which there are over 200 varieties grown in Bulgaria. Now, red grapes dominate with almost 2/3 of the vineyard production, while white wine is at 31%, Certain varieties for dessert wine styles at 6%. Bulgaria can boast that 70% of their wines are made from autochthonous varieties, and this is just one of the things that speaks to my cold, hard, cork dork heart. First, the red grapes. Mavrud. Mavrud is believed to have originated in the western Thracian lowlands appellation, but it does exist in other areas like the Black Sea coast, one of those original wine regions I mentioned earlier. Although it only accounts for about 2% of vines, it is a Bulgarian original and quite possibly the oldest grape native to the region. It loves its some oak, especially Bulgarian oak, as it has thick skin, so hello tannins and structure. It also rocks at some blends with international varieties. Rubin is a newer grape variety. It's spelled Rubin. It's only been around since World War II. The Pleven Institute of Viticulture and Enology crossed the Syrah grape with the Nebbiolo in 1944, and this grape is considered quite versatile with respect to making wines that are great for aging as well as approachable while young. Apparently, it is all the rage to blend this grape with the aforementioned Mavrud, and you, my friend, have a Bulgarian specialty worth seeking out. And we can't leave out the Pomid, which I almost did. It's another one of the oldest varieties traced back to the Thracians. While it mostly makes quaffable, light-bodied red wines, it does comprise up to something around 14% of the red grapes grown in Bulgaria. Now, for the whites, we have the Dimvat, D-I-M-V-A-T. Although its provenance is questionable as to whether it is a Bulgarian original, but so far it has been traced back to about the Middle Ages. Some believe it to be a Gouet Blanc, parent-sibling relationship, something like that. According to a year-old article in Gilbert Gaillard, this grape accounts for 5% of Bulgarians' vineyards. Now, the wines made from this grape are going to be aromatic, often fruit-forward with ripe tree, citrus, sometimes tropical fruits with a little higher acidity on the palate. Finally, I'm going to get to the red misket. Well, there are more. Don't worry. There are so many more, but nobody wants me to go through all these unless you, like me, and like to fall asleep listening to podcasts or audiobooks, because who doesn't love a good bedtime story? In that case, if you're cozy up in bed listening to this podcast, once upon a time, there was a white grape variety called red misket, and all the other white grapes laughed at it because it had a pinkish skin. I'll show them, said Misket, a.k.a. Misket Shervin. I make up more vineyard area than all you autochthonous bitches at 7%. And my white wine is unique because my pink-skinned ass makes beautiful white medium-bodied wines. I not only bring golden tropical fruit to the party, but floral notes too. Don't make me brag on my acidity and my potential Hungarian parentage. And that, boys and girls, is a quick introduction to the family of Bulgarian wine grapes that live amongst the international varieties like Cabernet, not to mention Eastern European grapes we discussed in past episodes like the Kadarka. And they all lived happily ever after, hopefully. And speaking of happy endings, here we are. Some fun little endnotes. I found that not only is Bulgaria in the unique position of Eastern Europe meets Asia Minor, where we find some fascinating archaeological evidence of early human existence, to include grape pips from 2 different species of grapevines, but Bulgaria also boasts some Neolithic evidence of early chicken domestication in Europe. That's what I said. Sounds like chicken would be a great pairing with some of these Bulgarian wines, Okay, despite the domestication of the chicken's tidbit today, I thank you for hitting play, and I hope you had a clucking good time. Oh, God, make it stop. You can always reach out to me via email. Email me at val@glassandsession.com. On the socials, pick your poison. I'm on Threads, Vino With Val, same as Instagram. It's fine. Blue Sky is growing like crazy. Lots of new wine peeps there. So thank you for finding me. And I found a lot of new wine peeps that I have never met before. So it's really kind of a fun place right now for the wine cult. Why not? I'm on Spoutable, Glass and Session, Vino With Val on Pinterest, and on Facebook, find me at Facebook/Glass and Session. Oh, and find me on LinkedIn, Valerie Caruso. If you dig smartass cat content, my podcat here, Smoker Doodles, he's at Nebelung_smoke_show on Instagram. It's the happiest place on the internet next to wine, Blue Sky right now. There is, yes, Glass and Session and podcast swag in my TeePublic store, linked way at the bottom of the show notes and on my website. And this week, I'm really trying my hardest not to hawk CBD gummies, truly. But getting yourself some swag is a small way to support the Winecast. Tri-blend teas, I always say, are my favorite in terms of softness and fit. Do size up at least one. And for those of you scoring yourself some swag, I thank you so much for your support. There are always sales on the site, so keep a lookout for those too. Glass in Session is a production and registered trademark of Vino With Val, LLC. Music is Write Your Story by Joy Stock. Website is glassinsession.com/podcast.